Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding. We, thine unworthy servants here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that, we having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. This honourable host now resume its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chan, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, not here. Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Daryl Vaz, Mr. Daryl Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Mr. Green, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Main, Mr. R. Scott, Mr. Azan, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mr. Heroy Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips,
Order, please. Let's have some order, please. Members. The House is in session, please.
All right. Can I proceed? I don't know. I just want to.
Can we proceed now? Thank you very much. Clark would like
Mr.
to
Michael
finish.
Phillips,
All in the record. Members, we can enjoy ourselves, but let's continue the business of the House.
she didn't answer.
Go ahead.
Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mrs. Vaz, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Wright.
Statements by Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, as we start this year, I am sincerely hoping that the order of business in this House will be conducted in a constructive way, and that the behavior of the members within the House will be appropriate to the business at hand. The next is that, Mr. Speaker, this is going to be a very decisive year, without question. And so I know that there will be a lot of very important matters brought before the House, and the debate will at times get very lively. But I'm sincerely hoping that the decorum will be maintained at all times so that we can, because this year is a year when we're going to be viewed by every Jamaican to see just exactly what posture we adopt. And I'm certainly hoping that the posture we adopt will leave our people with a good feeling about the behavior and conduct of our members of Parliament. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I just indicate that for today, we are going to have two reports from the Regulations Committee. The committee chairman will speak on the National Housing Trust benefits, and the Minister of Finance will speak on the GCT Act, and that will be followed by the Minister of Finance, who will move the motion to refer the estimates of expenditures to the Standing Finance Committee of the House. In addition, Mr. Robbins, the member from Southeast St. Andrew, will member from Southeast St. Andrew will bring back a message which fell off the order paper for last year. Sorry, a question. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I ask that you move ahead. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I sat and listened to the Leader of Government Business, and I was hoping that in his exhortation to the members about the new parliamentary year, that he would have mentioned our starting the business of the House on time. For whatever reason, Mr. Speaker, we've started almost an hour after the usual starting time, hour plus. And we have been at this for too long not to get it right, even on the first day. And I think, now, we would all agree, and I'm sure you are of the same vein, House Leader, that we have to take extraordinary efforts to ensure that we start on time, with the members coming and the House and the staff being ready to facilitate the start of the House for 2. Because what tends to happen is that as we go towards the latter part of the evening, the House dwindles in numbers. And we need to ensure that if we start on time, it's less likely that the members will depart before the House is concluded. So I am just adding that portion of it, House Leader, and I know that you are not averse to my saying that, because you would have said it, just that you forgot to say it this morning.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Laid on the table of the House today are the following 2020-21 Public Sector Consolidated Estimates of Expenditure. This for the financial year ending 31st March 2021. Medium-term debt management strategy for 2020-21 and to 23-24. Government of Jamaica Fiscal Policy Paper for financial year 2020-21. Tax Expenditure Statement 2020. Jamaica Public Bodies Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 2021. Estimates of Expenditure 2021 for the financial year ending 31st March 21. Report of the Regulations Committee on the General Consumption Tax Act Amendment Regulations 2019. Report of the Regulations Committee on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Special Selection Monimus Country Estates Housing Development Order 2019. Annual reports and audited financial statements for the 2018-29 financial year for HART. Minister Paper number 12 of 20, Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy for the year, pardon me, okay, I think that's it. That one was read, and pardon me, I think that's it.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Papers. Reports from committees. Mr. Whittle.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives and its deliberation on the General Consumption Tax Act Amendment Regulation 2019 and the National Housing Trust Benefit Special Selection Monimus Country Estate Housing Development Order 2019.
Notice of motions given orally.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. Be it resolved that the estimates of expenditure for 2021 and for the financial year ending, March 31st, 2021, the Jamaica Public Bodies estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2021, the Government of Jamaica Fiscal Policy Paper for the financial year 2020-2021, the Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy for the financial year 2021 or 2020/2021 to the financial year 2023/2024, the 2020-2021 Public Sector Consolidated Estimate of Expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2021, the Revenue Estimates 2020/2021 for financial year ending March 31st, 2021, and the Tax Expenditure Statement 2020, which were laid on the table of the House on the 11th day of February 2020, be referred to the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all the members of the House for consideration and report. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Whittle. Mr. Whittle. He did not conclude. He did not conclude.
I have a motion. I have a matter on that. Motion. Notice of motion given orally. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that in keeping with the Section 60 of the Integrity Commission Act 2017 and notwithstanding Standing Order number 76-1, this Honourable House appoint a committee comprising the following members as an oversight committee under the Integrity Act. Honourable Delroy Chuck, Chairman. Honourable Clifford Everard Warmington. Mrs. Marlene Malahoo Ford, Attorney General. Mrs. Marisa Dalrymple Philibert. Mr. Leslie Campbell. And from the opposition, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Fitz Jackson, the member from Southern St. Catherine. Mr. Mark Golding, the member from Southern St. Andrew. And Mr. Miguel Phillips, the member from Northwest Manchester, to sit jointly with a similar committee appointed by the Senate to review and report on the bill shortly entitled the Integrity Commission Act 2017. My understanding...
The commission reports to that outside committee.
No. The bill is also due for review. You remember the bill is in 2 years, The bill is gone 2 years already. So.
Well, I'm a member In these matters, I take advice from the, and I have taken advice, and I'm so advised. So we will proceed. Well, if it is not correct, you can stand on a motion to correct. Okay? Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Mr. Whittle.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move for the following two motions. Be it resolved that the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives and its deliberations on the General Consumption Tax Act Amendment Regulation 2019, which was laid on the table of the House on the 11th day of February 2020, be approved. Mr. Speaker, be it resolved that the report of the Regulation Committee of the House of Representatives and its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefit Special Selection Monimous Country Estate Development Order 2019, which was laid on the table of the House on the 11th day of February 2020, be approved. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take these motions.
Mr. Samura. Questions and answers questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the House.
Mr. Speaker, could I crave your indulgence to go back to question and answers? I'm asking for a recommittal of question and answers, Mr. Speaker.
You're moving a motion that which could be part of the session, so.
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm not. I'm afraid I did not hear what you just said. I'm asking for a recommittal of question and answers, and I'm waiting on the response from you.
Those in favor? Those against? Go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the member for South East St. Andrew, I intend to ask the Minister of Science, and Technology and Energy, the Science, Energy and Technology, the following questions.
Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Dr. Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
that moment when Juliet said.
I'll just tell the speaker. Mr. Speaker,
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the issue that arose at notices of motion given orally with respect to the naming of a committee for oversight purposes in respect of the Integrity Commission Act 2017 should stand as enunciated. However, we give notice by way of information that at the next sitting of the House, we will name a new committee to deal with a review of the Integrity Commission Act. Am I right? So that is the position that we have arrived at, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, if I may appreciate that. It's correct. They are two quite separate bodies. One is a committee established to review the acts. Many acts that are far-reaching, innovative, have a provision requiring a committee of either both houses or usually both houses to review the act within a certain period after that comes into effect. The Integrity Commission Act also amended the standing orders of the House to provide for a National Integrity Commission Oversight Committee to receive reports from the Integrity Commission and to provide oversight directly of that commission. It is a unique committee of Parliament because it is dedicated to a single commission of Parliament, not commissions of Parliament generally. It is that oversight committee which is being appointed now. However, the motion itself, I think, had an error in it because it made reference to it being appointed under a bill, which is not the case. The appointment is being made pursuant to the Integrity Commission Act, which was passed into law and brought into effect, I think, in February 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member is quite correct. The reference to the Integrity, the Oversight Committee for Review of the Integrity Act was improperly stated. So we will, next week, appoint a separate committee to deal with that. And we would have liked to have done it today since we are on our feet. But there is a change that I anticipate in the membership of that committee. And for that reason, I ask that it be put off until next week. Is that agreed? Okay.
We're in public business, you know, so you...
All right, well, Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, taking into consideration, Mr. Speaker, the correction that we made with respect to the naming of a new committee next week. In light of that, I move that the standing orders enable me to take this motion.
There is a motion for this standing order to be suspended to allow the leader of government business to take a matter. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. That's a summary.
Mr. Speaker, I now ask that the motion be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Motion approved.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Whittle.
I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motions, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Mr. Whittle.
Mr. Speaker, I now ask that the motion be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today. No, sorry. You have to refer the matter.
I asked for the debate.
The Minister of Finance will.
You just hijacked what I was doing. But I'm used to it.
It's all right. Never mind. I was going a little fast.
Dr. Clark, turn your mic on and do what you have to do there.
So, Mr. Speaker, I had asked, so you got the motion in favor of the referral, and just to make some remarks, that under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, we are tabling today the documents, estimates of expenditure for 2021, 2020, 2021, it's a lot of words, the revenue estimates for 2020-21, Central Government, the Jamaica Public Bodies estimates of revenue and expenditure for financial year 2021, and the Public Sector Consolidated Estimates of Expenditure, the Fiscal Policy Paper for 2021, the Medium-Term Debt Strategy for 2021, up to 2023-24, and the Tax Expenditure Statement for the year 2020, Mr. Speaker. Now, the tabling of these documents is, in addition to enhancing transparency and accountability in the budget process, they'll undoubtedly serve to enrich the public discourse and the upcoming parliamentary debate on the budget. Just some overall remarks, Mr. Speaker, as they are being tabled and referred to the Standing Finance Committee of the House. The central government's proposed budget for 2020 to 2021 achieves a primary surplus of 6.5% of GDP, which is consistent with our fiscal responsibility framework and the medium-term objective of reducing debt to GDP to 60% by 2025-26. The proposed total expenditure for financial year 2020-2021 is $852.7 billion, and this is $6.4 billion or 0.7% less than the estimated expenditure for this financial year 1920, primarily due to a 9.4% decline in debt service costs, even as non-debt service expenditure goes up by 4.3%. The total expenditure, Mr. Speaker, proposed is $852.7 billion, broken down into 527.6 billion for non-debt above the line expenditure, of which 453.4 is recurrent and 74.2 is capital, and then debt service of 287.8 billion, of which interest is 132.7 and amortization 155.2, with non-debt below the line expenditure of 37.3 billion. Mr. Speaker, the proposed central government budget continues to prioritize capital expenditure, which has been maintained at 3.3% of GDP, while seeking to enhance social protection and adequately provide other core government services. As the House is aware, Mr. Speaker, proposed capital investments are now evaluated through the Public Investment Management System, which requires that proposals must obtain the approval of the Public Investment Management Committee and the approval of Cabinet in order to be included in the public sector investment program. A number of capital projects across many various ministries are in advanced stages within the public sector investment process. And as such, accommodation has been provided for a contingency provision under the Ministry of Finance and Public Service capital head for projects that are anticipated to meet the PIMS requirement during the fiscal year. And this accounts for a significant increase in the allocation under the Ministry of Finance capital head for financial year 2021. Mr. Speaker, given the primary surplus targets and the estimated revenue, the proposed expenditure profile generates a surplus in the central government of 14.9 billion or 0.7% of GDP, which facilitates meeting our medium-term debt reduction objectives. Public debt at the end of this financial year, 2019-20, is estimated to be 91.5% of GDP, down from 94.4% at the end of 2018-19. Mr. Speaker, the financial year 2020-21 proposed financing for both central government and public bodies is expected to generate a further reduction in public debt to 87.2% of GDP by the end of the 2020-21 fiscal year. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, that during the 2019-20, this fiscal year, the government provided 22.5 billion to the Bank of Jamaica in the form of debt securities to cover losses and to recapitalize the bank. Reduction in debt to GDP would have been greater by this amount had the recapitalization not occurred. However, notwithstanding the impact on debt to GDP, the recapitalization speaks to the government's commitment to addressing all aspects of Jamaica's economic infrastructure as we seek to move Jamaica forward towards growth and development. For public bodies, Mr. Speaker, the public bodies continue to play an essential role within the government. And for public bodies, the budget indicates an overall balanced deficit of 16.7 billion or 0.8% of GDP compared to a surplus of 1.1 billion for this current financial year. The proposed deficit is primarily being driven by the significant capital investment being undertaken by the National Housing Trust and will therefore expected to contribute to growth over the medium term. The proposed public body envisages net expenditure of 441 billion, comprised of recurrent expenditure of 354.6 billion, capex of 78.9 billion, and amortization of 7.7 billion. On the consolidated public spectrum, Mr. Speaker, the consolidated central government and public bodies together therefore indicates total expenditure of 1,293.8 billion or 1.293 trillion, which is 17 billion more than the 1.276.8 billion, the 1,276.8 billion or 1.276 trillion for the current financial year. For the financial year 2020-21, consolidated capital expenditure is 153.1 billion or 6.7% of GDP, which compares to the 135.7 billion or 6.3% of GDP estimated for the 2019-20 financial year, demonstrating the continued push towards growth and development. The proposed consolidated public sector budget is programmed to be broadly balanced for financial year 2020-2021. Mr. Speaker, as you know, under our current fiscal responsibility framework, the estimates of revenue and expenditure are tabled, they're referred to the Standing Finance Committee, and only then is the opening presentation made. Found it necessary to make these editorial comments prior to the beginning of that process. And in my opening statement to the budget debate on the 10th of March, I'll elaborate on the proposed programs to be undertaken during the financial year 2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Golden.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his summary of the key elements of the material in this large compendium of numbers. And again, it reflects the changes that have been made since Jamaica embarked on fiscal sustainability, where these numbers are being tabled in early February so that the budget can be passed in time and enacted in time for the coming fiscal year. One point I would just add is I think another important element of the framework is the Auditor General's statutory responsibility to review these documents, the fiscal policy paper and so on, and to report back to the Standing Finance Committee in a report saying whether they comply with the fiscal rules that are enacted in the Financial Administration and Audit Act. And she's only given, I think, 2 weeks in which to do that. It's a very tight time frame for her as well, but it's an important element of the overall accountability framework and transparency framework within which Jamaica's public finances are now conducted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So, Mr. Speaker, that brings us to the close of the debate on the motion, and I ask, Mr. Speaker, that the motion be put to the House for approval.
Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today, so I move for the suspension, the adjournment, and the House will reconvene all right, we will adjourn for a date to be fixed. What day? You don't have a specific day.
February 25th? Huh? The debate is March 10th.
Yes.
The opening of the debate is on the 10th of March.
All right.
No, the Standing Finance is going to be before that. The 24th of February. 24th and 25th of February.
But the House itself will reconvene on the 10th of March for the House. But the Standing Finance Committee of the House will meet on the 24th and the 25th of February. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Members, the motion is that the House be now adjourned until the 10th of March at 2 o'clock. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. This Honourable House now stands adjourned until the 10th of March at 2 o'clock.